All right, now, onto my segment. I'm going to reveal to you all that I have discovered that actually the woke were right and institutional racism is real. I know, we've been hearing about it for years and we've always been saying, no, that's absolute nonsense. But it's true, it is. The only thing that they got wrong was the direction of that racism. And for this, I'm going to be referring to a few recent studies that have been done. This one is a very interesting one, first of all, by a man called Gregory Wroblewski. I apologise that I have definitely pronounced your name wrong.
He's good.
This is one that he actually replied under one of my Twitter posts and tagged and linked this and said, take a look through this. And I did, and I thought it was really interesting and worth looking at here. And so I'm doing it. And it's called Do the ADL and SPLC Disproportionately Police White but Not Black Movements? ADL being Anti-Defamation League, SPLC, Southern Poverty Law Center. Two big anti-hate groups within the US, and a lot of this segment will be related to the institutions in America. So just to front load that right there, I have drawn out most of the relevant text explaining this study and going over what's going on in here, the methods, etc. So the present study used a site called News on the Web, the News on the Web corpus, to elucidate any tendency for Anglophone news media to disproportionately focus on policing white but not black nationalist groups or ideologies, using number of references to or quotes from the two most influential social justice / civil rights watchdog groups in the US, the ADL and the SPLC, as a metric. The results seem to support the hypothesis that a great many more resources, at least in terms of numbers of news pieces, and that's important because that's going to be shaping the views of a lot of people, are devoted to monitoring potential hate groups when they are white. And you may say, well, what's the point of it being the ADL and the SPLC? Why are they important? Well, he explains, and I've explained a few times on this podcast before, but it's good to get a refresher for anybody watching the segment on YouTube for the first time. So the ADL's opinions carry weight. Their CEO, that's Jonathan Greenblatt, recently confirmed that his organization, quote, helped to write the national strategy to counter anti-Semitism released by the Biden administration and is now working as well with the Trump administration, end quote. So that's just direct institutional influence across administrations, across parties. The ADL is a uniparty apparatus. That's what they are. Like the ADL, the SPLC is extremely well funded, with an endowment of more than $730 million in 2024. I didn't even realize they were that well funded, funding its involvement in almost 150 legal cases. Its influence is such that the US Congressional House Committee on Oversight and Accountability highlighted the fact that the SPLC representatives visited the White House at least 11 times in a 3-year span, suggesting the SPLC's designations carry weight with the executive branch of the US government and that the center exerts influence at the highest level of government. So that's why it's important how these organizations view national terror groups and how their information is used to report on such, because that will have an influence in the highest levels of power. A quick perusal of the SPLC's hate map as of 2025 shows that the organization does not even track black nationalist groups anymore, or any other non-white nationalist groups for that matter, but applies intense scrutiny to people it quotes as being white nationalists. And one of the important things that he notes throughout this paper is that white nationalism or white supremacism, anything like that, is often applied to any statements by public figures that just demonstrate that they do not have shame for being white. They are not ashamed of their heritage.
The non-woke.
The non-woke. They don't hate themselves. So if you make, as he puts here, non-self-loathing white identity, if you have any statement that suggests that you don't hate yourself, then typically the terms white nationalist, white supremacist will be applied to you in news articles about you. And that's one of the ways they like to poison the well, because those terms are associated with hateful, violent ideologies. Accordingly, he says, 2 virtual corpora, and this is talking about the methodology, were created using the NOW's Find Text Subcorpus Generation option using the search terms Anti-Defamation League and Southern Poverty Law Center. Thus, any articles containing either of these phrases would populate the corresponding virtual corpus. These virtual corpora will hence, carrying on, it was deemed necessary to create these using ADL and SPLC, as presumably the acronyms blah blah blah. They were then searched respectively to determine the number of occurrences and articles which contained the lemmas white nationalists or black nationalists, and it was done in such a way that it separates nationalists, so it will also come up with adjoining and similar words like nationalist, nationalism, supremacy, supremacism, etc. Searches of both corpora demonstrated a very large disparity in occurrences and article numbers for each of the search terms along racial lines. First, in ADL corpus, there were 1,368 occurrences and 809 unique articles of white nationalists, but only 27 of black nationalists. In SPLC, there were 2,709 occurrences of white, but only 89 of black. So you can see here in these pie charts the references to both of these as found in articles that were referencing the ADL and the SPLC regarding white versus black nationalism. You can see that is an absurd overrepresentation there. But then you say to yourself, well, there are more white people than black people in America. So surely maybe that explains the overrepresentation. Perhaps there are just more white versus black nationalist groups.
It's not just that. It's also the fact that mentions of black nationalism would typically be classified as the voices of the oppressed.
Well, that's something that he mentions further on in the article. I'll carry on. In the SPLC's This Year in Hate and Extremism 2023 annual report, there were listed 165 active white nationalist groups in the United States. In contrast, their most recent data on record for black nationalists, that's 2018, was 264 chapters.
I imagine there's about 165 white nationalists, period, not groups, people in America. The actual proper ones with the torches.
Yeah, full on. Of those types, yeah, I imagine they're a massive, tiny minority. But confusingly, after 2018, the SPLC then began to refer to these groups exclusively as black separatist the following year, when the number decreased slightly to 255. To further complicate matters, shortly after, the SPLC's intelligence project announced it would be collapsing the black separatist listings and be reclassifying them under hate ideologies that better describes the nature of the harm that their rhetoric inflicts. In other words, a visitor to the SPLC's current hate map site can no longer see how many black hate groups exist. Those that used to be classified racially as black nationalist or separatist are now diffusely distributed, one may even say diluted, among ideologies such as anti-Semitism, and the author here suggests that is perhaps as a way of making that number of 255 look smaller in comparison to the number of white nationalist groups. So if we take those numbers, the most recent that we've got of 264 and 255, how can you rationally excuse the massive overrepresentation in reporting of this when it seems that despite the population disparities of whites being a much larger percentage of the population in America than blacks, these groups have so much more media attention pushed on them than black groups? How do you explain that other than a potentially institutionalized mainstream bias against white people and non-hating white group people in particular?
You can be openly a black nationalist. I mean, just in this country, for example, when Dawn Butler put out that poem, she's like, I'm one of the chosen ones because I'm of the first ones. It was a full-on black supremacist poem that she put out. She's an MP, so you can just openly be there.
Yeah. And everybody notices it. But it's nice to have, if you're ever in a debate with Destiny for whatever reason, to have a study to point to.
No.
I don't know, do you have a study for that? Yes, actually. Yes, we do.
But then he'll quickly dismiss it by checking Wikipedia.
He'll go, this person says, Wikipedia says that this is a hate group making this study, so I can just dismiss it immediately. And then he goes on to harass women online or something. But it carries on, and we talk about the way that these two different groups can be portrayed outside of just the flat figures that we've got here, and the biases within these organisations of the ADL and the SPLC. And he goes on to say, first, the ADL and its outspoken CEO, Jonathan Greenblatt, have spoken profusely about the potential threat of white nationalism and hyperbolic, bordering on ridiculous terms in a 2020 speech, almost a little Freudian slip there, before the ADL's annual Never Is Now. Could they be more?
Never is now.
Could they be more stereotypical, man? Their Never Is Now summit on anti-Semitism and hate. Greenblatt detailed the ADL's policies to fight not only extremism in general, but white nationalism specifically, calling on the US government to bring the same energy and intensity to the fight against white nationalist terror as it has done in the past in the fight against radical Islamist terror. You are now as much of a threat if you're a white guy who doesn't hate himself in the US. According to Jonathan Greenblatt, you're just as much as a threat as the 9/11 bombings.
And,
I mean, seriously.
According to some studies or some biased data reporting, they're saying, well, Islamic terrorists don't represent the majority of threats after the period of 9/11. And the question is, why do you isolate that incident?
They like to mess with figures in many different
even
ways.
if that were true, because that's debatable, but even if it is true, there's a selective isolation of the 9/11 terror attack.
Also,
in order to give a completely mistaken view of what's going on and just blow it out of proportion.
I also simply wouldn't trust those figures being given to me without reading into them a lot and looking at the methodology.
No one, Harry.
Going there. Yes, I apply extreme skepticism as well, but it's when I get a nice gut feeling telling me that I'm being lied to. Not only that, carrying on with some of the statements that have been made by Greenblatt and the ADL and SPLC in general, Greenblatt has taken on social media saying hashtag white supremacy is terrorism and clear and present danger to the homeland. Whose homeland? Anyway, in one of his countless appearances on American national television, Greenblatt upped the ante, saying that white supremacy is a global terror threat. Plain and simple. Amazing given that we are a 7% minority across the global population of the world. Later calling it a transnational terrorist threat that could engulf us all. Is he just looking at the existence of Europe and saying, well, this is a problem? This is a problem.
It is weird because Jewish people are safer if there's a stronger white population in a country. Have Jewish people become more or less safe since immigration has gone up in the United Kingdom, for example? As I don't understand all this. Greenblatt also is just off his nut. I mean, he
is insane.
He's like a mafia boss. When Musk took over Twitter, he said something. I'm paraphrasing slightly, but it was something like, "Do we need to like take this guy out?" Like he looked at Musk like he said something. I can't find some extraordinary tweet about like taking him down. It's like. You can't. It's like the richest man in the world just bought Twitter.
He and the ADL in general do use mafia tactics because he did then try and organise a massive advertiser boycott against Twitter purely because of Musk's taking it over. So yeah, he literally came in like a protection racket and said, we don't work with this guy. And if you do decide to work with this guy, we're going to smear you in the press. I literally have the ear of the president. Whichever president. Doesn't matter which president. They all love me. Okay, so it's like actual mob boss.
Yeah, it's like be a shame if something happened to that website. Yeah, nice app you've got there.
And then it contrasts with the way that he talks about black nationalists. Obviously, white supremacy is the greatest threat in the world, but black nationalists, he says, we need to make careful distinctions between the good and the bad within the movement. The black Hebrew Israelites, you'd think he would hate the black Hebrew Israelites, right? But apparently he said about them, he described them as simply the guys in Times Square who observe Judaism in a way that's not so traditional. Really? Okay. Perhaps tellingly, Greenblatt later talked about the deep history of shared values between the communities, even having common enemies. Like, okay. In the case of the SPLC, their biases are even more transparent regarding the 2020 decision to no longer include the black separatist category on their hate map. They said, We hope by dropping this listing, we can lead to by example and be able to contribute to a more accurate understanding of violent extremism, one that foregrounds white supremacist extremism as the most dangerous threat to national security. So they're just outright saying we have an institutional bias against white people and white people who don't hate themselves in particular.
They sound like Don Lemon, like no one seriously thinks this stuff. You're having to just pretend this is the serious threat. It's incredible.
And this kind of like institutional bias, because this is looking at the way that it manifests in articles, but we can see how this kind of institutional bias crops up elsewhere. Like we mentioned in your segment, the calls by some within the free press and the mainstream to not punish insane black guys who murder innocent white women who are just minding their own business. Apparently that's injustice if you don't execute him, if you don't give him rehabilitation for in insane and murdering people for no reason. Well, that's just if it was reversed. If it was reversed, people would be marching on the streets, you'd get the BLM signs all over again. It would be a case of 2020 if the media chose to push it. But the media chooses not to push it in this case. Well, why? It's obvious. It's because the victim was white. So they just don't care. But we know the truth. We know the secrets. We've seen the FBI statistics. We have 1350 memes that go around all of the time. We know what's going on. But can you even trust the police and FBI statistics? That was the question behind a very, very interesting new study that has been done by a number of very interested social scientists on Twitter who have decided to check the accuracy of these kinds of memes that go around, because you might have even seen these pop up on your timeline from time to time. They go viral, right? Which is where people who you can tell from the picture are clearly not white are being arrested and charged with crimes and classified as white in the statistics.
So saying Julio Diego Montoya Trejo is not white.
It's a difficult call to make. It's a tough one, but I have a sneaking suspicion that he's maybe a little bit more Aztec.
This guy's Wilbur Alexander Hernandez Gomez just got that Wilbur in there just to claim he might be.
Just to throw you off the scent.
I like the second one, Garcia Patricio, Daniel Garcia, gender unknown, race unknown.
They put Garcia in there
it's
twice
Daniel.
Just to confuse you.
He's like, I'm Daniel. What? I'm
the
the
man
white
is
though.
a mystery.
Actually, it's like if they've put Garcia in there twice to really hammer home just how Mexican this guy is. They still go,
greetings, fellow white people. Why have you got Garcia twice in your name?
But the problem with these is they're memes. They go around every so often and people go, have you seen this? But there's nothing more substantial behind them. You might just be picking out a few, cherry picking a few that aren't representative of the vast majority of people. They might even be statistical aberrations. Maybe it's a case of there's about a 1% chance with each racial group that they're going to be misclassified, right? So these guys decided to test it. They scraped 5.5 million criminal records, and from that they got 1.5 usable bits of data from these criminal records, and this is 1.5 million mugshots from 39 states. And what they found was that 29%, let me say that again, 29% of Hispanics were officially classified as white. And the model confidence for this was 92.7% in the models that they were using. If you want to go through their statistical methods, there is a full article on Substack that goes through the whole thing that you can find in the link below this podcast on the Lotus Eaters website. But even when they adjusted it and took out some of those results for a 95 to 100% model confidence, 22.4% of predicted Hispanics were still being assigned white by the justice system. Now, well, this is just going through statistical data. This is just putting it into models. So how do you double check it? Well, it's easy. You've got all of these records. You go through a few that you can eyeball and determine, is it right? So the model came up with predicted black assigned white low confidence, right? So it was unsure. but all of these people were classified as white. Right? Do many of these people look like could these people have come from the shores of New England? Are these descendants of the Protestant
bottom
Puritans?
left is you're really struggling.
Yeah, really struggling.
I could give you like top 3 in on the top. I could give you that one.
You maybe
as a kind of error. Bottom left is nuts.
Yeah, and
this guy's not even the right way up.
I like bottom.
I
Like
like
a
to
bat.
think they just hung this guy by his feet for the picture.
Like
until he
a bat.
became white.
Yeah, all the blood can rush to his face and the melanin can rise. Everybody knows that melanin is like heat; it rises, right?
I'm really struggling with Aaron Bagsby as a white. I suppose they might have got confused by the Hobbit-esque surname.
Yeah, Bagsby, Baggins. Oh, okay. Maybe he's one of the Sackville Bagginses. That's why they all wanted to avoid him. And they had some more pictures here of the Hispanics. Now, with some of these, this woman, you can see how there's confusion, maybe even with top left. But basically, as you start to descend, it becomes more and more like Mexican as you go down. But all of these were classified as white. Mr. Marco Antonio Garcia.
There it is again.
Garcia
Padilla as well.
What about Juan
Lopez
Pizarro?
Jose Lopez was apparently a white man. Okay.
Juan Carlos
Maybe he
Pizarro.
had the Trump tan,
These were the
Florida tan.
Maybe he also changed his name to fit in more with the Florida population.
The test should be, can a white bloke pronounce them? If I'm not sure how to pronounce them, they can't be white. It's not perfectly scientific. Sorry, carry on.
But either way, so this is clearly showing that they are very obviously trying to pump the numbers, right? They are very clearly
Rookie number, pump those numbers.
They've got to pump the numbers up because oh god, they found the FBI data online. We're going to need to pump those white numbers up. We really need to. Although I think with the FBI, it's that they don't classify Hispanics as non-white, so they just get automatically lumped into the white statistics, despite the fact that many of them would dispute them being white.
You can imagine the scene in a movie like Garcia, he's white, and then the sort of subordinates like, but he's white.
He's white. Listen, he may look Mexican. He may sound Mexican. He may not be able to speak English, but ask yourself, is your job worth it?
Yeah.
And they also broke this down based around state as well, and found that in Florida, you can see how much it varies from state to state, but in Florida, 60+% of Hispanics were being classified purposefully as white rather than Hispanic when they have the option to classify them as Hispanic. And I know somebody in the chat here has said that unfortunately for statistics in the US, it's white non-Hispanic or white Hispanic. Still, you can break those down within the DOC, the Department of Corrections databases, as well as like non-white Hispanic and white Hispanic or whatever. So you can still break it down a little bit further, but this is clear and obvious misrepresentations of the statistics. And what this is doing is this is not only pumping up the white violent crime rate and just general crime rate as well, it's pulling down the Hispanic crime rate. As Cremieux here says, the Hispanic crime rate is conservatively being underestimated by 20% and possibly by as high as 30%. And they say here as well, what this is, if they were correcting for misclassification rates in Hispanic criminal records, they would be 31% higher, according to the upper end of it, and it would decrease white rates of crime by 6%, and it would also decrease black rates of crime by 1% through all of the misclassification. One of the most important and useful things in here as well is just near the top, they have a study of whether bias in general is common, and they go through a number of different cases where people have studied various different biases within the system to see if there's any anti-white bias or just bias in general. Most of the time, they do find that there is anti-white bias within this within the justice system. So you can see here, for instance, experimental research using deadly force simulators found officers were slower to shoot armed black suspects than armed white suspects and less likely to shoot black suspects, despite showing implicit bias. And there's a lot of different studies like this. Not all of them found bias in the various things that they were studying, but I do think it is clear that in America, at the very least, and I think we can broadly classify this across the West in general as well, there is a massive bias against white people within the justice system, whether that be to try and pump up their numbers to make it seem like whites are committing more crimes and Hispanics are committing less crimes than are the actual figures, or in police behavior, because police have been taught that any police action against non-white people is almost certainly a one-way ticket to a court, because they might get chauvined.
But also, this is staring us at the face. It's hidden in plain sight.
It's obvious.
Wokeness is adherence to the intersectional calculus, which says all society is structured by a hierarchy of oppressor and oppressed, and the oppressors are straight white men, invariably, in every society.
Yeah.
So when they're saying the goal of justice is equity and equality, and equity are the means to take us to equality, they constantly try to say, well, let us bring up the oppressed and bring down the oppressors. It's hidden in plain sight. But
that's the thing.
I will give it. I completely agree with you, because this is one of the things that people are demonized for noticing.
Well, again, it's obvious to anybody who cares to look and pay attention, but it is important to still make note of these things. And it is important, outside of just sharing memes every now and again, for us to have a definite confirmation that this is going on, because clearly the numbers are being fudged on purpose to try and hide criminals within the statistics or shift them around.
If you would like to watch the full uncut version that is also uncensored, head on over to lotuseaters.com to find out more.